Our guest today, I have known Dr. Micah Woods for a long time. Mike, I think we were grad students together, weren't we?
Well, we were grad students at the same time, so we didn't really know each other well, but we crossed paths at meetings. And
That- That's
then
right.
I I graduated 2006, and you maybe 2008, so or 2007.
2007. So I think we were 1 year split. And I remember, so I had my first faculty position at the University of Hawaii. And one of the first things I did when I got to Hawaii was I sent an email to you. And introduced myself and said, I think you're the closest turf person to me within a few thousand miles. And you quickly corrected me that I was wrong, that Greg Wyko on Guam was actually the closest, but you were happy to connect. And we've kind of been doing things together ever since then, right?
Yes, we have, and yeah, it was nice to hear from you, and good to have a chance to visit you a couple times in Hawaii while you were there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for the group that's here today, with all our Turf Tuesdays, we have a lot of lawn care folks in Tennessee in the Southeast region. We've got a lot of our extension professionals are on this call. We have some superintendents who you may already know. But for the group at large, I think you might be a new name. Why don't you kind of give a little primer? And now you're with Pace Turf, which is based out of California, but you're joining us today from, I would imagine, Bangkok, Thailand.
Now, I'm actually in southern Thailand. I'm some hundreds of miles south of Bangkok. I'm actually closer to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia right now, 7 degrees north latitude. I think what's Honolulu like 20 or something?
I honestly couldn't even tell you, Mike. It's been
Yeah,
so
but
long.
I'm very close to the equator, um, and so yeah, that's where I'm joining you from. And so I run a company called the Asian Turfgrass Center, which does work all over the world. So it started off doing work in Asia for the most part, and now it's worldwide. And I acquired Pace Turf a couple years ago, which was in California. Now it's a Oregon company, and Pace Turf is an information service, and ATC is also basically information service. So I develop and share turfgrass information through consulting, through seminars. I do soil testing for select clients around the world, and do advisory projects. Last week, I flew to Sri Lanka and did a project at the Royal Colombo Golf Club, which is going to be having their 150th anniversary.
Wow.
I'm sure Royal Colombo Golf Club, yeah, it'll be older than any club in the United States. So some of these, it's pretty cool, for golf. And you'll see parks and other botanical gardens and such where there's turf grass in places that are former British colonies that have been around for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for those who don't know, what brought you from grad school at Cornell to start up a company in Asia? Like, what does that roadmap look like?
I'd been a golf course superintendent in China and in Japan prior to grad school because I wanted to see some of the world. And the place where I could get the highest paying job was uh, at that time was in China. So that's why I went there. But I always had a plan to go back to grad school after I'd gotten some real world work experience. And while I was doing that work, I took some holidays to the beaches in Thailand, to the beaches in the Philippines. I visited Hong Kong and the Great Wall of China and stuff like that. I actually met John Sorokin at in Okinawa. He was visiting he was inspecting a turfgrass nursery down in Okinawa, and I went to meet him uh,
Wow.
way back then. So as I was doing the work, I realized, wow, um, this is a big part of the world, and there's no turf grass research or extension to speak of, certainly nothing in English. Um, it's like a big part of the world with a lot of grass and not so many specialists. So I thought this could be an opportunity for me to do something where I don't have so much competition and I could, really have a big impact. and not have to compete with so many people. And then also, Thailand is a wonderful tourist destination, and I really enjoyed going on holiday here. And so I thought, wouldn't it be nice to live there also? And um, you see many, I mean, there's many nice places around the world that are fun to go to, and Thailand's one of them. So,
Yes.
um, so I was kind of, as I was going to graduate school, I was focused very much on my research, which was about fertilizer and about soil testing and how you can determine which nutrients in the soil are available to the grass, and uh, how much fertilizer might be needed based on what the soil test results are. That's what I was really focused on. But I would still take some holidays, take Christmas holiday and go backpacking around Thailand for a month. And in doing that, I made some contacts in the golf industry, and they said, if you'd like to do some research here, we would help you get started. So by the time I graduated, I was just able to move to Thailand and start a company.
Yeah, and I think you've been pretty successful, particularly in terms of reach. I mean, when I think about your arc there, one of the biggest things that kind of, I don't know, I saw you make real big strides on was you started the global soil survey, and then that got leveraged into kind of the MLSN concept of nutrition that I think is gaining more of a foothold. Can you share with our audience a little bit of the background of that for those who might not be familiar with MLSN?
Yeah, MLSN stands for minimum levels for sustainable nutrition, and it's a modern method for interpreting soil tests. Uh, I'm sure everybody who's done a soil test has had some good turf, and the grass is green, it's growing fine, no disease, everything looks great. But you send the soil test to the lab, and it comes back with recommendations. You're low in potassium, or you're low in phosphorus, or you're low in manganese or something, and it has recommendations for adding a lot of fertilizer. But there's a disconnect because the grass is already perfectly fine. And if you look into this a little bit more, which I did for 5 years at Cornell for my PhD, I looked into it quite a bit. It turns out that the recommendations for turfgrass, the fertilizer recommendations for turfgrass, are based on agricultural crop research. It's not based on turfgrass research. And it's also based on soils that are agricultural soils, which especially when you start getting to sand-based root zones, which become more and more common today on athletic fields and other high traffic turfgrass areas. Um, it's really normal that those areas, because they're sand, they're going to be low in nutrients. But when you take these old 40, 50-year-old recommendations that are the classic kind of recommendations that are like in those textbooks behind me, uh, that just get perpetuated and repeated and don't get updated, it's not actually based on turf grass. It's not based on modern nitrogen rates. It's not based on modern turf grass varieties. And it's certainly not based on the type of soils that we're using today. So, in collaboration with the scientists from Pace Turf, Larry Stoll and Wendy Galerter, and as they retired, I subsequently acquired their company. But back in 2012, we decided, instead of just complaining about the guidelines being broken, instead of just saying, oh, they're no good, they're 40, 50 years old and they're based on agriculture, we decided we have a lot of soil test results from good performing turf. Can we do a big data analysis project, study the soil test results from our database of soil test results from good performing turf and come up with some new guidelines? So we did that. We introduced MLSN in 2012, and within a few years, it took off, and it turned out to be something that a lot of people around the world were quite interested in. And what's, uh, I mean, I guess the most important thing is it just works really well. It it guarantees that your turf will have enough nutrients. You won't have deficiency. It will recommend a little bit more fertilizer than you need. So if I would argue with some academics, with some other scientists, some people criticize me for saying that MLSN recommends too much. But I would say, yeah, because we don't want deficiency. And if you look at the alternative is to use guidelines that's going to recommend even more, or the alternative is to mess around with deficiency. So I think MLSN is really good because it's just right in the middle. It prevents deficiency, and it over applies by a small amount, so it's quite efficient.
Well, and I think, you've obviously helped my group here at UT with this and in the projects we do, particularly related to weed control. And, I can think back to, you showing me the park grass experiment at Rothamsted and how manipulating the amounts of nutrients in the soil kind of over a long arc, particularly not so much nitrogen, but phosphorus and potassium and calcium and magnesium and some of the nutrients that are in smaller quantities for growth really affected the weed dynamics that came into forage plots at Rothamsted. And I know in some of the work that we've done since then, particularly more in kind of high-end turf management scenarios like golf, you see, like, I mean, I can think of a graduate student who you're on her committee now, Maureen Cahu, and sampling putting greens in Tennessee, and for most of the nutrients, the amount of that's in the soil at the beginning of the season is easily double the MLSN requirement, if not 2 or 3x that more, just kind of at the to start the year, and that's been really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, it's eye-opening for me sometimes too, and I think it is really interesting to study this. And then the nutrients that you apply and the pH that you maintain your soil has a big impact uh, on what's going to grow. So we want to create the conditions where the grass can grow well, but we don't want to create the conditions where the weeds can grow well. I think Matt Elmore is doing some really interesting research in pH and probably looking at phosphorus, looking at Poa annua vigor. I mean, I think in the end, that's going to be bentgrass vigor versus Poa annua vigor type of experiment. And I've predicted before, and I'll predict again here. I think that research will uh, shock the world of turfgrass, because I think people won't. Uh, and again, this is why we do experiments, because we don't know what the outcome will be. But I think the outcome will be such a dramatic effect that people won't think that pH and phosphorus could have as big of effect as what I think Matt will find. So I'm really, really, really interested in that. And I think as we learn more and more about what the soil conditions are that favors a certain grass or favors a certain grass being able to resist disease, um, we can then learn about that and implement it, and just continue using the best. It's a term, best management practices. Use the best information available and the best management practices that we know at the time in order to try to produce the results that we want. So I think, like,
Yeah,
spring dead spot, right? I'm not really an expert about that, but I know that I think the type of nitrogen has an effect on that. Um, with Bermuda grass decline or other uh, root
many,
infecting fungi.
yeah, many rings
Man,
another.
yeah, yeah, you got nitrogen rate, you got nitrogen source, and then some of these you've got manganese, you've got soil pH. Um, and so you don't just want to go out there and just say, okay, I've got this soil test, I've got a recommendation to put 20 pounds per thousand of calcium carbonate or something. And it's like, yeah, maybe if you're growing cotton or something, that would be a
Yeah.
desirable thing to do. But for turf grass, it's different. And there's just not a lot of people doing turf grass nutrition research. And one of the reasons why I wanted to live in Thailand is a low cost of living. So if I was living in the US, I would have to actually work all the time. But here I can just do research. So I all of my research is self-funded basically. So I just study what I want to study, and that's one of the reasons I think why over a 20 or so years since I graduated, I've been able to have a big impact around the world because I'm passionate about this. I get to study things that are interesting to me, not just things that can get funded, but things that are like uh, maybe I'm lucky at choosing things that also other people are interested in. So, um, and certainly MLSN turned out to be something. It was one of those. So then people all around the world become interested in it, and then I like to share information about that. So, yeah,
Well, I
Turfgrass
mean,
is pretty cool.
well, and I think too, like a lot of the stuff, and I'm sure we're going to talk about growth potential here in a little bit, and OM246, like the Venn diagrams all overlap, right? That, the MLSN thing connects to some of the other factors that you've focused on in your career that are growth related and trying to understand the different levers that drive growth in either direction, either positive or negative. Because at the end of the day, in managing turf, that's what we're trying to do. If you're managing a putting green, well, you're trying to balance growth to get some sort of ball roll characteristic for the sport that's going to be played on it. And then there's a component of like, well, actively growing turf is going to be suppressive against weeds, and we want to have growth in that direction too. I mean, one of the things, Micah, and I'll be interested to get your take, that I've been really digging a little bit more deeply on recently and talking to folks about in our region is if you look at the golf industry post COVID, and I did a little deep dive into the National Golf Foundation database of rounds played. And I think 3 of the past 4 years, the rounds played totals are greater than what was achieved during the air quote tiger boom, right? And forever, that's been like the high water mark of the industry. And I'm one who thinks, well, okay, that's awesome for the game and for golf courses and whatnot, but that's also a lot of wear and tear on the properties, right? And in a state like Tennessee, the golf courses are used year round, and as you get south of here, they're definitely used year round. But the grass that's on those surfaces isn't growing year round, right? And I think that there's a shoulder season traffic issue that hasn't been addressed yet. And one of the things to me that's really interesting is I look at my time, in the Northeast, going to Penn State, just like you were at Cornell, and you did work on this in Bentgrass, that applying nitrogen kind of late in the fall will enhance the growth and vigor of the turf the following spring, right? And I see plenty of golf courses here that come out of winter really slow and it all gets chalked up to temperature, right? All is cold. But I look at, well, your last nitrogen fertilizer application was in May, right? And maybe it's a slow release particle. That's cool, but it's long gone by the time we get to next May, right? And I'm just wondering, is there a world where more golf courses need to think about uh, fall nitrogen fertility to be strong, to withstand the traffic that comes from shoulder season play, particularly with so much golf cart play here in the U.S.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, basically yes. But yeah, you just want to grow the grass at the desired rate. Um, and the two things that you can control as a turf manager are water and nitrogen. Well, theoretically, you can control water a little bit through supplying irrigation and through drainage, right? But mainly, you would supply nitrogen, so you do that to stimulate a little bit more growth. Um, but sometimes the course can just be uh, overused, right? And I think something that I see in the United States is what I tend to see is poor infrastructure, um, and that there aren't enough cart paths. and the drainage is not good enough. And so then it's like, there's really not much you can do. And I do a lot of work in Japan, and Japan is all zoysia. You know, 90, there's more than 2,000 golf courses there, and they are 90% of them are zoysia grass, tees, fairways, and rough. And that's a year-round golfing season, and they'll be doing 45, 50, some courses up to like 70,000 rounds. Never have issues with winter kill. And I saw there's just an article. I mean, I know there was some winter kill on zoysia in Bermuda grass in your region and a little bit farther north, I think, this past year. I see that kind of stuff happening in the United States. And then they're saying, okay, well, it's happening in wet areas and stuff. But what I see on the courses in Japan is they have a drainage system that works. They've got cart path from clubhouse, all
A
uh,
continuous trail.
a continuous trail, and I've just noticed like American golf courses. I've been surprised sometimes at the what seems to me inadequate drainage infrastructure, and then as courses get utilized more and more, and as golf cart traffic becomes as that increases, if you don't have cart paths, like I don't know that adding a little bit extra nitrogen is going to solve the problem
That's
where the
fair.
infrastructure is just not there, right? And so you can do the best you can, but you really have to address the root cause.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And those infrastructure projects are expensive and easy to punt down the road. And I've been involved as you have as well with several projects where we want to come in and put a new grass in, but we might not want to do the boring stuff of correcting the drainage and the infrastructure that you've noted, because that's far less sexy, but by no means less important.
Yeah, it's it all the extra revenue from places being very busy that at some point that needs some of that needs to get reinvested into the ability to maintain that.
We can buy TrackMan simulators, Micah, and play simulator golf, though, with that extra revenue. We don't need to put new drainage in. So, kind of related to projects and this offshoot of, you noted on Zoysia, and I think, I've talked to you several times in with different clubs that the grass selection is a debate that will go on forever, right? The eternal debate here will be bent versus Bermuda on putting greens. I've worked with you on clubs debating whether Zoysia was right for them, if they were the right geography. You've helped clubs in other parts of the country make a decision to go to bent grass, right, away from warm season turf, and um, all that's been pretty growth potential driven. And I think growth potential is really cool. I have started to have students in my lab work growth potential as a variable into their research, looking at, say, how grasses respond to a herbicide treatment and if there's injury or recovery from that injury, how growth potential is a factor in that. Can you talk a little bit about just what growth potential is and in its utility?
Yeah, growth potential was also developed by the very brilliant scientists at Pace Turf who had a lot of really good ideas for things that are very useful. So when we look at the air temperature, it might vary from minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit on a really cold day in the winter, and it might go up to 105 or 110 degrees Fahrenheit on a really hot day in the summer. We might expect that type of range, and the grass is exposed to those type of temperatures. Most of the temperatures are going to be much closer to the center of that range, like 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, the temperature scale is something that is fine, but what if we take the temperature scale and just run it through an equation and switch the temperature? Instead of saying it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit, we could say that is a 0% chance, a 0% growth potential for Bermuda grass, because that's going to be too cold for Bermuda grass to grow. Or what if we said that's still too cold for cool season grass to grow, but it's not going to be dormant. That's going to be like a 2%. Don't quote me on that, but it's going to be a
Mhm,
really
yeah,
low
sure.
growth potential for cool season grass. And then once you get up to uh, 55 degrees, and so we're talking average temperature now. So it might be low temperature of 45, high temperature of 65, average temperature of 55. Now the warm season grass will start to break dormancy, and you'll get a 2% or 3% growth potential for warm season grass. And now you go up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, your high's 100 and your low's 78 degrees. Uh, and so now it's really hot. And as far as temperature goes, that's ideal. That's 100% growth potential for warm season grass. So what growth potential is it's a simple equation and an idea that we can take temperature and just isolate the effective temperature and express it as a percentage. And when you do that, there's a lot of things that are related. There's a lot of things that are related to the effective temperature on grass because the grass is going to grow more and it's going to require more mowing and it's going to use more nutrients when it is at a high growth potential. Because the four things that affect growth are light, temperature, the um, let's see, light, temperature, the leaf nitrogen status, and water. And
Mhm.
so we've talked a little bit about everything except light. You can't really do much about light. The light just happens. You can't do much about temperature. The temperature just happens. But what we can do is adjust the water, and especially we can adjust the nitrogen, and that those can be adjusted in proportion to how the temperature changes. And so as the temperature is higher and the grass is actually growing, we can use that to predict some of the nutrient needs. And so um, a practical example of that would be like, say, Bermuda grass in Memphis versus Bermuda grass in Knoxville. Um, and Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. You're good.
Okay. If we have Bermuda grass in Memphis, the temperatures are going to be warmer than they are in Knoxville. It's going to be higher growth potential. So you'd need more nutrients supplied. You'd have a longer mowing season. You could predict uh, when the grass can start getting mowed and when it's going to grow so slowly that it won't get mowed. And so that would look different in Knoxville than it would in Memphis. And you can use growth potential for that. You can use temperature also, but it's a little bit more elegant to just express temperature as a 0 to 100%. It's a little bit more intuitive, uh, I think. And then we can just multiply the growth potential times some other things like fertilizer or times mowing to predict how many times we would mow, how much nitrogen to apply, and so on.
Yeah, no, and I think, we could talk about growth potential in the downstream all day. One question that I get often from folks that have maybe like a surface level knowledge of this but want to learn more is is there a growth potential that's right? Like, if I'm looking for to plant a turf, whether it's a warm season turf or a cool season turf, is there a value of like, well, if it's above X, I should plant a cool season turf. If it's below X, I should plant a warm season turf, or vice versa.
Hmm. I think I don't really use growth potential for that, and I tend to just go and look at temperature. And so I find it more useful to just study around the world what the temperatures are, where warm season grass outperforms cool season grass, and vice versa. Uh, and so um,
The coolest one I've seen, right? So I could think of a club that said, okay, they were debating what they were going to do from a grass selection standpoint for a large scale construction project. And the person that was managing the turf of that club said, okay, I'm going to look at the length of my season for when the club is open. And I'm going to have like a head-to-head battle, and I'm going to look at this over multiple years, and I'm going to say growth potential for cool season turf is X, and growth potential for warm season turf is Y, and I'm going to chart who wins more games and do that for the duration of the season for multiple years. And it painted a really clear picture of what was um, the right species for them, and what they
Well,
were trying to
it,
do.
so you can do that, but I'm not sure that it's going to give the same answer for everybody because warm season grass is much more efficient at using water. So if you have a water limitation, uh, you can't look. All this is doing is isolating the effect of temperature, but uh, I've got a blog post about this. If you go to places, there's places in the world, and I don't know if you'll know where these are, but maybe you can deduce where they are. There's places in the world that pretty much every day of the year have 100% growth potential for cool season grass.
Okay.
Do you know where these places are?
I'm going to guess Scandinavia.
Well, what do you think the growth potential is when it's 2 feet under
Oh,
snow?
good point. Yeah, it shows you. I need more coffee, Micah. I don't know.
365 days in the year. It's near the equator at high elevation. So these
Fair
places
enough.
are called hill stations. So as you get close to the equator, and in fact, Sri Lanka, where I just was last week, has a famous one called Noir Elia. If you look at the book Turf for Golf Courses by Charles Vancouver Piper and R.A. Oakley, uh, on the first or second page of the book, they talk about the beautiful bentgrass at Noir Elia. And actually, Noir Elia is a little bit too high elevation. So their growth potential is a little bit too low. So if you want to hit 100% growth potential for 365 days, you'll actually go down the mountain a little bit uh, from Noir Elia, and then you'll hit a location where it is 100% growth potential. But if you go look at those places, if you look at those places and see what's growing at those locations, do you know what's growing and thriving? It's all warm season grass, despite the growth potential being 100% for cool season. And the reason is if you go day after day after day after day, where it's still warm enough for warm season grass to grow. So it can't grow really quickly. It doesn't grow very quickly, but it's so much more efficient at using water that it just will tend to dominate over the cool season grass.
Oh, that's super interesting. And I'm like you. I think a lot of the selection debate comes down to what's the objective, right? I can think of another property that went through a similar exercise with growth potential, but their objective was different. The first one I shared, well, they wanted to have, and they're not water limited, but they wanted to have the best possible conditions for the longest arc of the year. And I can think of another property that said, well, we want to host high level championship level golf in the middle of the summer. Well, growth potential is a little different then, right? Because that can make your selections different if your kind of effective season is very truncated, to be just in the summer where you want to be at your absolute best. So it's by no means a catch-all for everything. We do have a question, and a relatively advanced question here. Dr. Woods, how does growth potential of a Bermuda grass putting green change if growth regulator is applied using calendar or GDD based intervals?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the answer is the growth potential doesn't change a bit because the growth potential is not how much the grass is actually growing. It's just the potential for the grass to grow based on the temperatures that it's experiencing. And so it's once you start applying growth regulator, that's where something else that I really recommend doing, which is collecting the clipping volume. That's where that tells you how much the grass really is growing. So the growth potential, notice that it says potential. That's the potential to grow based on the temperature. The actual growth is something that we can measure, and you can put an exact number to that by measuring the clipping volume.
Yeah, and I mean, do you want to expand a little bit about clipping volume? I know this has been another thing that you've been a real leader on. And anyone who's ever had me out for an extension visit, we've talked about it. Do you want to share with the audience a little bit more about clipping volume?
It would be my pleasure. I uh, I saw that some people were emptying baskets when they're mowing greens and dumping it into these buckets and measuring it, and then going back to the office and writing down how many liters or how many gallons of clippings they collected. And I thought, what a waste of time. Uh, we should be out there cutting the grass, raking the bunkers, scouting for disease, pruning trees, just doing the work. There's so much work that needs to be done. What are those people doing, wasting their time measuring the volume of clippings? And that was more than 10 years ago when I used to have that mindset. And then I realized, wait a second, uh, when it comes to putting greens, the fewer clippings we get, the better the ball rolls, the farther the ball rolls. Um, oh, wait a second. If we're and then very quickly I started thinking, wait, if we put fertilizer, that should make a certain amount of clippings. It should cause the grass to grow a certain amount. Or wait, if we can harvest the clippings, maybe we can estimate how many nutrients have been used, and then we can replace those nutrients. And people ask me, well, what growth regulator rate should they use? What reapplication interval should they use? How does how does that work in their climate for a different type of grass? And then I realized, wait, you can measure this if you measure the clipping volume. So starting in 2013, 2014, I did a 180 on that and said, you know what? I think this is actually quite useful to measure. And it turns out I've talked with various people in South Africa, in England, in the United States, and we have various estimates of how many golf courses are actually doing this. I know there's a couple sports fields. I know in Dubai there's a little bit of measurement of this. In Singapore on sports turf there's a little bit of measurement of this of clipping volume. So it's applicable to sports and to golf, but I think the estimate of how many people are doing it is still like 5%. Some people say less than 5%, but of course it's skewed for me because it's a big world and I'm contacted almost daily by people that are doing it. So I just kind of focus on the people that are making use of this excellent tool.
So you talked about golf, you talked about sports turf. We have a question here about sod production. Would it fit in sod production? The question reads, what would be the correct approach, I assume, for using growth potential in sod production? When we think about water and nitrogen inputs on C4 turf, how would PGR fit in as well? Can you speak to that at all? I mean, I would think, Micah, that like you said, growth potential is growth potential, right? And it's just a function of how much the grass could grow given the temperature. Do you
Yeah,
have
I
any
think
thoughts in a sod production standpoint?
for sod production, I would really uh, you're trying to make a profit and you're trying to grow the grass as quickly as possible and then deliver a high quality product. So I can see a couple uh, ways to use growth potential there is if you schedule your fertilizer applications based on when the grass can use the nutrients. So you apply nutrients that are proportional to the time of the year, to the growth potential at the time of the year. I expect that you get as efficient of photosynthesis and growth as possible. And that's going to be efficient use of fertilizer. So you're not going to waste fertilizer at a time of, you wouldn't be over applying fertilizer at a time of the year when the grass cannot use that high of a rate. So for me, I would adjust my fertilizer rate based on the grass's ability to use it. Um, and that's going to lead to more rapid growth. I suppose if somebody would research that, they could demonstrate that fertilizing according to temperature would be more efficient.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there any place that this is another common question I'll get. Any place to easily get growth potential for your location?
Yeah, join the hundreds of people around the world who are Pace Turf subscribers for only $275 per year, and you'll get your own weather page that has that information at the click of a button, and you get it emailed to you 3 times a week, including the past 30 days at your site for anywhere in the world, and an upcoming 5-day forecast of cool and warm season growth potential. So you can get that automatically from Pace Turf. Greenkeeper app provides it also. And there's spreadsheets that you can get from Pace Turf that have the equation, and you could put in your own weather data, your own temperature data, and then you could run it through that equation and get it yourself.
Okay, so Pace Turf is the one-stop shop for all things growth potential.
Pace Turf invented it. Pace Turf provides that to our members. And Pace Turf also has some free resources that include some spreadsheets that you could get that would allow you to calculate that yourself. And and yeah, it's an equation. It's not a secret.
So, Micah, we got another question here. A lot of interest in growth potential. How much should we adjust our nitrogen application rate if applied based on paste turf growth potential calculations when a regulator is used?
Uh, I like to use the growth potential for planning into the future, and I like to actually adjust my applications not based on growth potential, but based on clipping volume. So if we're talking about putting greens, uh, I would, I assume we're talking about putting greens. If we're talking about lawns or something, we're probably not measuring clipping volume. So then I would just assume that I'm getting, let's say, 50% growth suppression, and would adjust it on whatever my estimate of growth suppression is.
That makes sense. I mean, we've got a follow up here. If you're tracking GDD and keeping up with regulation, how much more can you learn from measuring clipping volume? Um, I mean, I'll shed some light on it, and I'm curious to hear what you think. I mean, to me, Mike, clipping volume gives you something to quantify the efficacy of your regulator program, right? In terms of when is the regulation actually wearing off and when is a sequential treatment needed? To me, without doing any sort of quantifiable clipping volume, that becomes very subjective.
Yeah, I don't really understand the question because I just don't like, just because you apply a product doesn't mean that it's producing the results that you want. Like you have to check it. So for me, the check is how much the grass is growing.
Well, I mean, and the other thing too, and while GDD has been a good guide, I think that has modernized how people are using regulators like Primo, for example, it's not a be all end all, right? And I think there's oftentimes a sentiment of, well, I hit a GDD value and it's like turning a light switch on or off, and it doesn't really work that way. There's other variables in place that affect the efficacy of those regulators beyond just air temperature. And one of those, and we could not have enough time to delve into today, but is nitrogen availability in the soil, right? That could occur from mineralization. Um, I don't think GDD addresses that at all. And if one was tracking clipping volume, at least theoretically, Micah, you'd be able to understand if that's affecting your regulator performance, right?
Yeah, GDD and the reapplication intervals that are based on that are are very useful and effective. But if you apply 4 pounds of nitrogen per year, or if you apply 2 pounds of nitrogen per year, you're going to get totally different growth rates based on the identical growth regulator rates and reapplication intervals. So there's other things like nitrogen that are going to have an effect on that, and presumably the water supply would also have some effect on that. And and so I like to check it. And that's why things like the GDD I can use for planning, growth potential I can use for planning, but uh, to really check it and fine tune it to get the conditions at the high level that I would want, I like to check what's happening.
Yeah, no, I mean it's always beneficial, like you said, if you can measure. I think another factor in that just ongoing and forever will be debate is, if I look at ultra dwarf greens in our region on Bermuda grass, a lot of those were no-till conversions from bent grass. So we know that the organic matter in those root zones is going to be much higher than what a bentgrass green would be, right? So the potential for that mineralization to occur, at least in concept, would be greater, because all that organic matter that accumulated when it was bentgrass wasn't ameliorated or remedied in any way when the conversion happened. We just planted new grass on top in many instances, and that's why the values are so much greater. Really quickly, a little just a back to business real for GCSA folks. This is your GCSA CEU event approval code for today. I'm going to say this very clearly as I do every month. This has nothing to do with pesticide credits. This is only for golf course superintendents. They use this event approval code right here, and we'll log this onto the GCSA website so they can get their continuing education units. This has nothing to do with pesticide accreditation in any of the states that have awarded pesticide credits for today's webinar. Should you lose this event approval code, you can email me and I will send you this event approval code for your records. So we have one more question here. Um, Dr. Woods, if the goal is quick turnover in sod production, how could we increase the thatch buildup? Any thoughts on that,
Hmm.
Mike?
Uh, Genetics and fertilizer and water. I I mean, I think that's all you can do. You choose the grass that's going to grow the at the most rapid rate at your location. Um, so you're not going to use St. Augustine grass in northern Tennessee, probably.
I think I
And
know where
and
this
then,
where this question's coming from. I won't say the individual's name on air, but I think I know where this is coming from. There's been discussions recently, Micah, that winter injury happens every year, right? And there's numerous factors that lead to that winter injury beyond temperature. But one of the things that I see, and I know others do too, is that if you have winter injury that's bad enough, you'll resod. And it seems like often the same areas are resodded every year, right? And I'm one who thinks that that's a lot to do with how that area is used, whether it's a traffic standpoint or maybe it's a light standpoint, just that individual micro environment's not really favorable. But a recent kind of idea that's been put forward is when sod's coming in, well, it's not really cut very thick. There's not a big thatch layer, and maybe the lack of thatch in that sod um, is making it not as durable, so it doesn't survive as well. I think that's where that question's coming from.
yeah, I don't have a magic answer because you need time, and so you grow the grass as much as possible for as long as possible, which is going to be based on the genetics of the grass combined with the growing environment, like whatever the temperatures and light are at the site, um, and then fertilizer. So yeah, if you can over fertilize it for a longer time, you're going to have more thatch. But if you're trying to have quick turnaround on it, then you're going to have less thatch.
And it's also counterproductive that, like, I can think about if I'm resodding a collar, right, that might have been damaged in the winter. Well, having a lot of thatch there might not be optimal from a playability standpoint, right? Like that just, I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
tricky question.
yeah. Well, the transition zone, we're going to be having these kind of there's a lot of things that just have no answer, and that's why it takes such skilled people to do the work, because things need to get fixed, and then you have to choose the best solution that won't be a perfect solution. Where if I'm in Portland, Oregon, or in southern Thailand, it's pretty easy to know what kind of grass to use. Um,
Yeah,
but but if
fewer
I'm in
debates.
not, yeah, transition zone is a different beast.
Anything, Micah? Well, we got a couple minutes left. We got one other question that's come in, or actually two now. Anything you want to plug really quick? I know you mentioned Pace Turf. Is there anything out there that you want to plug? I know you have a book, The Grammar of Greenskeeping, anything like that that you might want to let our attendees know about.
Yeah, I send some free email newsletters. So if you go to asianturfgrass.com or go to paceturf.org, you can sign up for those. And that's an easy way to keep in touch with me and keep informed about what I'm doing. I travel around the world and come to the US a couple times a year usually, and I continue writing and researching, and I'm excited about what's coming up. I'm uh, I'm going to continue for as long as I'm able to share practical and applicable and effective turfgrass information, and I love it when I also have some podcasts. I have a YouTube channel. So if you if you're interested in getting podcast information or getting YouTube videos, um, if you if you would rather do, I'd rather watch Shohei Ohtani baseball highlights or something. But if you'd rather watch turfgrass videos, I've got those. But anyway, check out my websites and check out the newsletters, and then there's links to all my social media, podcast videos, and so on.
Okay, great. Segueing back to something more technical, but this is a technical enough question and thoughtful enough. We got to get this in before we run out of time. Micah, roughly how much nitrogen applied to a Bermuda grass putting green is used for shoot growth versus root growth? How would it compare on bank to a bank grass green? That's a
That's a
comprehensive exam bank question right there.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer, but uh, I often figure that we just have a root system. So when I'm making my calculations, if it's not a growing situation, then I just consider the root system to be kind of static. So I consider that the nitrogen is like all going all to the shoots, um, which is just the way that I tend to think of it. So I think like, okay, the roots kind of recycle themselves in terms of nitrogen in the soil. But
Well,
that's not a correct answer. That's just the way that I tend to think of it, because I don't know how to answer that brilliant question.
yeah, and I'm same. I don't know how to answer it either. I think about the two in the sense that the rooting potential of bentgrass to me would be greater, that you could see bentgrass root deeper, more deeply into the root zone. Um, it's pretty rare to see Bermuda grass or ultra Bermuda grass rooted pretty deeply into the profile. So with that in mind, I would think the nature of the two grasses, I don't know exact percentages. I would think on ultra Bermuda, maybe more of the nitrogen would go to shoot growth versus root growth. Um, but again, I don't know for sure.
The one thing that I will say is the more nitrogen you put, uh, the greater proportion of that will be allocated to shoot growth. So as you put less and less nitrogen to any type of turf grass, as you reduce the nitrogen rate, a greater percentage of that nitrogen will go to stimulate root growth. And so that's one reason why it makes sense to really control the growth rate and just supply the amount of nitrogen, and which is why I don't like over regulating, because if you over regulate, you can end up over applying nitrogen. And I like to regulate a little bit, but I like to supply as low a nitrogen rate as possible, because that's going to lead to a better root system generally.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And that's something I talked with Bingru Huang about, and there's a video about it on my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, they can
And
check all that out there.
yeah, yeah, I'm a great source of turfgrass information that may or may not be interesting to you, but I keep putting it out there.
So the weeds of the South book over your left shoulder is interesting to me because I have it on my bookshelf too. So kudos to you for
And
that.
I think, thank you. I think you may have given me this copy. I've got all kinds of good books here and refer to them at various times through the year.
We have one question left for you, and it is, how is the pad thai over there?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's not something that is so commonly ordered because there's so much other exciting food. But I have had some very good pad thai, and I travel a lot. So when I come back to Thailand, I really enjoy having Thai food, and I'll have that dish a few times a year, and we have it with sometimes with banana flowers and other exotic things.
Continuing to be the most interesting man in turfgrass. Well, thank you for the time, Micah. I know it's probably some ungodly hour where you are now, so we will let you go. And thanks for those joining in for the July edition of Turf Tuesdays. We will be back in August to talk to Dr. Jason Henderson and Vicky Wallace with Yukon Extension about some of the pesticide bans there. So until next time, we will see you then. Enjoy the rest of your day.